Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Good morning. My name is Jose Ruizalba. I am Professor of Marketing at the University of Westminster, London. This is an online research seminar within the research group I lead, Service Research and Customer Experience. We have some research members today with us, also external members of the group and other researchers that you would like to have joined us. So thanks for joining us today. And it's a pleasure for me to introduce today to Professor Per Skalen. Professor Skalen is based at the Service Research Center at the Karlstad University Business School in Sweden. He has broad teaching experience at different levels, and also he has experience in conducting workshops with senior researchers on writing and research skills. His work has appeared in several journals such as Marketing Theory, Journal of Marketing Management, Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science, Journal of Business Ethics, Journal of Public Policy and Marketing Organization, and the prestigious Journal of Service Research. This journal, he got an award in 2015 for his paper Transformative Service Research in a special issue of this prestigious journal. Congratulations. And he's interested in applying many theories, but one of them is the practice theory, amongst other theories, to market research. And this theory will be the main theme that he will discuss today. We will discuss with him, hopefully. And that's the title of his talk, A Practice Perspective from Marketing and Service Research. As I said before, we will record this session on YouTube, and it will be edited finally. So if you don't want your name or yourself to be shown in the video, just let me know. We will be sure that everyone is happy with the final editing. And I agreed with Professor Skalen he could give a talk of 45 minutes, followed by the Q&A and discussion. So we aim to finish at 11:30 a.m. London time. So Per, whenever you want, please. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the very nice presentation. As Jose said, I will do a presentation on today on how you can use practice perspectives in marketing and service research. And I have done research on that previously. I have used practice theory to understand value co-creation and value co-destruction in several papers. So you can see some of the key papers here. So that started quite early, my research on that with the paper that you see on your left here that was published on your upper left, Co-creation and Co-destruction of Practice Theory-Based Study of Interactive Value Formation, that was published in 2011 with my colleague Per Skalen. And I have published other papers with Per also, but also papers with other people, as you can see here, outside of the Service Research Center where I work, but also with colleagues within my center. And I have also used practice theory more recently in a paper that is in press with the Journal of Service Research, together with Johanna Gumerus from the Hanken School of Economics in Helsinki. So we use in this paper practice theory to conceptualize services and service innovation in particular then. But I have never really gotten the time previously to write foundational conceptual papers about how to use practice theory in marketing and service research. And now I'm on a 1-year sabbatical. In Sweden, it works like this, that you are not entitled to a sabbatical as a part of your position, but you can apply for it from external funders and get a sabbatical. And I'm on a 1-year sabbatical now. Just came home from Naples the other day, spending 1 month there to interact with researchers like Christina Mehl and others on practice theory in marketing and service research. So what I'm doing during my sabbatical is focusing on writing conceptual papers on how to use practice theory within marketing and service research then. So I have one paper that I will present to you today that is, I call the MAP paper, that is Marketing as Practices, which is a paper already published by Marketing Theory. It's Impressed with Marketing Theory Notes. You can access it on their homepage. And another paper that I call my SAP paper, Services as Practices, where I introduce practice theory to service research then. So I'm going to begin today with the MAP paper and then the SAP paper. Before I do that, I will just give you some ideas of what practice theory is. I mean, practice theory is a quite complex theory that has been developed within philosophy and sociology, so it's not possible for me to explain everything for you today, but I will just give you some insights and positioning of practice theory. So that is where I will start, and I used the paper by Reckwitz from 2002. I think that's a very good introduction to practice theory. I mean, practice theory was developed by researchers such as Pierre Bourdieu, Anthony Giddens, and others, which are usually referred to as first generation practice theories. And now there is a second generation with Andreas Reckwitz, one of the key names, and also Theodore Schatzky from the United States is another key name. And Elizabeth Shaw from the UK is also very acknowledged in this field. But I will just start then by positioning practice theory. So you see here different types of understanding activity in the social sciences. You can draw on a classical economic perspective and focusing on rational actors that take great rational decisions, and activities emerge from these rational decisions, so to speak. Then you have the sociological perspective that focus on social structures, norms, and values, and how people behave according to these. And then you have culture theory or culture theories, which takes a kind of middle position. And if we should summarize culture theory in one sentence, I choose to do it like this, informed by Reckwitz. I mean, there are tons of books written on culture theory, so this is of course a simplification then. But Reckwitz says that culture theory is theories that says that in a local context, structures of knowledge are constructed by the actors that are active in that context, and these structures that they themselves construct enable and constrain the activities and sense-making processes of the individuals belonging to that group. So people at the Service Research Center where I work, for instance, we construct certain types of knowledge that we then use to act and make sense of each other's actions. So this is then a way to avoid the agency structure problem in the social sciences. And practice theory is a particular type of culture theory. So practice theory focuses on practices, organized activities routinely carried out by a group of people. So practice theory says that you can gain access to these local structures of knowledge that enable and constrain people by focusing on these activities. So that is where I want to locate practice theory in the social sciences. If I just have to use one slide, I could use 100 slides to explain practice theory, but this is just to give you an overall idea where we are in the theoretical landscape, so to speak. So we can take one example that we all know very well, that we can say that university studies consist of different types of practices. And practice theory would argue that if we want to study a university, we should focus on these different types of activities that is going on at the university, like seminars, lecturing, examining, supervising, and so on and so forth. But we can also study mountain biking or walking in the forest using practice theory. It's a theory that can be used to understand every type of activity then. So my first paper, the MAP paper then, that is already out, Marketing as Practice, a Framework and Research Agenda for Value Creating Marketing Activity. I have been written that together with Bernard Kova, Johanna Gumerus, and Antti Siivonen, and it came out a couple of months ago. We depart from the AMA definition of marketing here that you can see, and this definition, just need to do like this so I can see my slides better, highlights activity, and it highlights value. And in our problematization, when we read much marketing research on market orientation, strategic marketing, and so on and so forth, we say that much of this research has focused on resources and capabilities rather on the value creating activities per se. So our argument here is that activities can be understood better by drawing on practice theory. So the aim of this paper, of this conceptual paper, is to articulate marketing as practice as a framework and also a research agenda for this type of research. So what we basically do here is to follow the lead of several other disciplines like management, and in particular strategy research within management, where strategy as practice research has been a big thing for many years. So in this paper, we depart from the particular practice theory of Reckwitz that I just talked about. That was the person I used also, and the same reference I used to position practice theory in the social sciences. And he's making a distinction between three key concepts here. And this conceptualization has been quite much used in the strategy as practice field, particularly when that field was forming in the middle of the noughties in the work of Richard Whittington, for instance. Perhaps you have seen that. So if you want to read strategy as practice research, you can go to the work of Richard Whittington. And Reckwitz then makes a distinction between three concepts that we draw on in this paper. He says that practices are shared activity templates. So it's the templates for activity that I can use to conduct real activities then. And he reserves the notion praxis for realized activities. So for instance, when I prepared for this lecture and seminar today, I have an idea what the seminar is, right? So I use that template to prepare for this activity, and then now I'm realizing that activity. I'm doing the praxis of seminaring, so to speak, and of course I can use this template. I know what the seminar is, but these praxis that is realized activities are not the copy paste of the templates, because you never know how things will turn out. I mean, now the technology is working fine, but maybe someone is breaking the line here to London and we have problems, right? So even though these shared templates says a lot about how practices can be conducted, you never really know what is happening when they are carried out, so to speak. So practices not determine praxis then. And then we have the practitioners, the people that carry out the activities. So today we are the people that carry out research seminaring activity. Or more formally, you can say that the practitioner is a person that enact practices to carry out practice. So I'm enacting the seminar practice today to do the activity that we are doing now. But this could also be applied to many other types of fields then. This same logic. So that is a key ingredient in our paper. Another key ingredients is a review of practice theory research in marketing, and we identify 13 studies. And then we have a quite narrow definition of marketing, focusing in particular on the marketing that goes on within firms and how that activity relates to the environment. A bit informed by the marketing, the definition of marketing by AMA. We have an appendix of how we did the review in the paper, but we also review research in management. I talked a bit about strategy research, consumer research, and market studies, in which practice theory has used much more compared to marketing. So on the basis of Reckwith's conceptualization of practices based on his practice theory, supported by the review of prior research, we say that we can understand marketing practices as templates of organized activities that marketing practitioners routinely enact to carry out marketing practice that creates value for and with customers, client, partners, and society at large. So marketing practices are the practices used to create value. So we connect here to the research in marketing, but also to the definition of marketing by AMA. Marketing practitioners are the people that carry out marketing practices. And marketing practice then is the realized value creating activities. So that is the key to our conceptualization, and based on that we outline a framework, and you can see here to the left in the box, value creating marketing activity in firms, which is our key focus. When we wrote this paper, we had the sole focus on marketing activity in firms when we started to write the paper, but we got critiqued from that and broadened the perspective to take in the environment also. So we say that you can understand what value creating marketing activity in firms by focusing on marketing practices, marketing practitioners, and marketing practice. And you can see also the relationships we see between these different three different areas then. So marketing practitioners, for instance, they enact marketing practices, and marketing practices shape marketing practitioners, for instance. Marketing praxis, the realized activity, change or stabilize marketing practices. And marketing practices enable and constrain marketing practices. So our key idea in this paper is to launch a framework that is an alternative to resource-based theories of the firm to study marketing, doing that on the basis of practice theories, that in order to really understand the activities that are going on within firms. We also say that this internal activity can be done in such a way so that it aligns with the actors of the society, customer, clients, and partners, which is emphasized in the AMA definition, or in such a way that it misaligns, that it doesn't work well, the value creating marketing activity that we are conducting within firms. So we are drawing here on these concepts of value co-creation and value co-destruction that I have been doing research about before, and I showed you in the opening of my paper. So try to understand with this notion of alignment and misalignment how well our marketing activity within our firm is working for the society, and what we can do when it doesn't work well. So how can we realign misalignment so that value co-creation rather than value co-destruction is created then. So that is the framework that we launch in this paper. And we have also a marketing as practice research agenda then. You can see that we have 4 different types of research questions that we suggest in this agenda, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we are giving particular examples of how we can better understand certain topics based on these 4 general areas then of the agenda. Okay, so that is the first paper. I think that took about 20 minutes, so maybe I managed to do this in 40 minutes then. My second paper is called Services as Practices. It's the SAP paper then. And the subtitle for this paper or project is Towards a New Foundation for Service Research. It's not published yet. This is something that I'm working on, so I like to present some initial the manuscript as it stands now then. I think most of you are familiar with service research, but if we should summarize 40 years of service research in one slide, this would be my summary. So we have 2 perspectives here on services. One that perceives services as an offering, where goods are distinguished from services then. So we have goods, which is one type of offering, focusing, implying tangibles, and we have services that implies activities then. And the particular definition of services that was dominant for a long time in service research was the IHIP definition, which said that services are like goods, but they are intangible, heterogeneous, the production and consumption is inseparable, and they perish after they have been used. And then, as you know, I think at least, we had another perspective popping up in the middle of the notice with the service dominant logic. And I call that the logic perspective, and because there are other logics also than service dominant logic. We have the customer dominant logic, we have the service logic of Kister and Grönros and so on and so forth. And key to this perspective is that service is not an offering or a particular type of output from firms, but the logic of value in use. So we shouldn't focus on the offering as such. We should focusing on the effects that different types of resources create for us as customers or other types of actors. So in fact, service dominant logic is argued that both this perspective or both the research on goods and services in perspective 1 is based on a goods dominant logic, which suggests that value is created within firms for the value of firms. But service logic is changing the perspective to the customer and the beneficiary to see what value is created for the customer when they use services and goods. So in service dominant logic, the notion of services is not that important. It's rather more important to focus on the value that is created for people and other actors. The problem that I'm departing from here, that a lot of researchers, for instance, I counted the first of the service research priority paper that you perhaps have seen in Journal of Service Research. I think you should read them if you haven't been reading them. And they use the notion of services as a type of offering. That is services according to perspective 1 here, 72 times. So the problem here is that a lot of researchers, but also firms, managers, customers, and public organizations constantly refers to services as a type of offering and not as a logic. So people talk about services in a way that we don't research services in service research. And due to the influence of service dominant logic, there is very little research going on today that try to conceptualize services as a type of offering. in the same way as actors refer to services. So that research, which was very hot in the beginning of service research, has more or less died out now. So these are two examples of companies and the National Health Services that uses services as a type of offering in their presentation of themselves. So I'm think that this, I think the logic perspective has benefited us quite a lot, but as my problematization slides showed, I also think it's problematic. So I'm backing here. I'm rereading service research, and I realized that a lot of research suggests that services are activities. I mean, that was, if you go back to these classical papers of Ratmal, for instance, Lovelock and others, they all say that. And there are interesting review papers written at the same time as service dominant logic was launched in 2004, saying the same type of things. But these review papers also say that, or they question that it's hard to know what an activity is. What is an activity? So Edvardsson et al., for instance, that worked with me at the Service Research Center, it's not clear what we mean by activities, deeds, processes, performances, and interactions. So what they more or less are saying that it would be a good idea to define services as activities, but we don't have the theoretical means to do that. So in the paper by Edvardsson from 2005, they say that we need to embark on the service logic journey. Because we can't find a good conceptualization of services as activities. And we can't continue with the IHIP research because there is a lot of research that has been showing that defining services in the terms of IHIP doesn't work that well, doesn't match reality very well. For instance, not all services are not only intangible, and so on and so forth. I'm saying in this paper that practice theory is the theory able to conceptualize services activities. So I'm claiming that I have found a theory that Edvardsson and his colleagues was argued lacked to conceptualize service activities. So that is my aim then, to develop a conceptualization of services activities, services as practices, sorry. The SAP paper. Right, and here I'm using Schatzky's theory, and I shouldn't go too deep into that and see that the clock is running fast for us also. But he has a similar kind of conceptualization of practices as Requis has, but he's not making this distinction between practices as templates and realized activities as praxis, but he's rather arguing that everything happens within practices. So he's not making that distinction.
Hello, Per, are you there? Hello? Can anyone hear me, or is it just Per's connection?
No, I cannot hear him. I
But
think we lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's only Per, it seems.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's wait. Maybe he lost the connection. I'm going to stop recording.
Here, but that was not intended. But do you see my presentation now?
Yes, we lost you just for 1 minute, but now you're back.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry for that.
It's fine.
We'll just do an adjustment here like this. Okay. So he has a bit different conceptualization of practices, and he's also emphasizing that practices are organized by understandings, which is knowledge, shared knowledge, procedures, which are rules, engagements, which are the goals of practices. Today, for instance, I have a goal to share my work on practice theory in service research and marketing, and also materials. I use my computer here today, which didn't work well for just a couple of minutes ago, but I hope that it will work better now. And the internet, we use the internet also.
It's fine now.
Yeah, it works. Yeah. Okay. So he talks about these as elements of practices, and he also say that practices are often bundled together. Many practices work together then. So let me exemplify this version of practice theory for you. So we can say that there are templates for activities there, which is a part of practices. We have realized activities, and these templates prefigure what we do, and the activities reproduce or change the template. So we have a kind of circulation here that can explain reproduction and change. And we also have the elements of practices, procedures, understandings, materials, and engagements that organize this circularity. So that is the key concepts of Trusky's practice theory. And we could go back to the university example here again and see that several seminars then can be bundled together. And all these practices, like seminars would be one practice here, lecturing another, and so forth, are informed by these elements. So E here is engagement. So that is the goal of the seminar practice, is to sharing ideas, for instance. Materials, I need projector and computers to show PowerPoints.
We are losing you again, Per. I don't know if you can hear me now.
I'm not able to hear.
Yeah. Let's wait, because maybe it's a problem with the Wi-Fi. Going to...
Okay, so another important thing here is that Trusky is emphasizing is that these templates of practices are framework for intersubjective sense making. So when we have common practices that we can understand and that we engage in, we can also talk about how to conduct these practices and how the value of them and the meaning of them without conducting the practices. So practices from this perspective becomes a way then to make sense of each other actions without acting them out, so to speak. And that is something that I use in this research also. So based on this conceptualization, I define services and based on the readings of service research that you can see here also, some references. I define services as bundles of value co-creation practices that consist of templates and elements that intends to co-create reciprocal value for at least some actors, but that can, when performed, both co-create and co-destroy value. So what I try to do with this is to conceptualize services as offerings then by saying that they are bundles of value co-creation practices. So my argument is that I have found a theoretical language for defining services as activities then by using practice theory. And I also talked about the sense-making aspect of practices, and in the context of value co-creation practices, this become important because it becomes a way of making sense about value, about talking about value, and even perceiving that services without acting them out have value. So I can say that, you know, hospital services has a lot of value for me, even though I'm not engaging in them. I think it's important that these services should be a part of the society. So this is a lot of information in one slide, but it's basically the image I showed you before on Chasky's practice theory, but also showing that services are bundled together to exemplify then my definition of services from this perspective. And we could think of university studies as bundles of value co-creation practices from this perspective: seminars, lecturing, examining, and supervising, as I talked about before. Okay, I have 2 more slides. I used also value theory in this research, and I will not go through that in depth here, but during the pandemic, when you had a lot of time on your own in your home, I engaged in a reading project on value theory, starting with Adam Smith and ending with the book by Pitts, which is actually a summary of value theory. So I did some serious reading when it comes to value theory. And based on that reading, I say that the value of services can be understood in this way: the more actors that are involved in and committed to a bundle of value co-creation practices, a service, and the more time and effort these actors spend performing these VCPs, the more value is generated by a service. So this builds on this type of value theory, and I think this provides a definition of value that we have lacked in service research, because service research has more or less say that value is benefit or utility, and what is known as use value then. And I'm also drawing on this work to say that we can not only focus on use value, but also exchange value. We need to be able to quantify value. We need to be able to understand the role of money. We need to be able to understand the interrelationship between use value and exchange value. And value in use, which is a key concept in service dominant logic, which is different from use value. Use value is something that is inherent to services or goods. Value in use is emerging in when you're using goods and services. So that is de-emphasized in my perspective here when you conceptualize value the way I do. Okay, so based on this, I outline 8 propositions for service research. So it's an attempt to create a kind of framework on the basis of practice theory and value theory for how we can approach services and study services then. And I think you recognize some of these from my presentation here. Services are bundles of value co-creation practices intended to co-create reciprocal value for at least some actors. This second one has to do with the definition of value I talked about. And this one has to do with the value of services that not only emerge when we use them, but they also have inherent value. I talked about use value and exchange value. I didn't talk that much about these general processes of value co-creation, but that is also something coming from value theory. I talked about co-destruction, that these value co-creation practices may be performed in such a way that co-destruction ensues. We had a bit of co-destruction today with the break in the transfer here. and also how these practices the value co-creation practices can be reproduced and innovated. Talked a bit about that. And also how we can understand the context of services on the basis of value co-creation practice and practice. According to practice theory, the world exists of practices that you can use to act, but you only need to study practices, so to speak, on the basis from the perspective of practice theory to understand the world. Okay, so that was my presentation. Thank you for listening. I hope it was perhaps a bit for you that are not into practice theory. It was maybe a lot of information, but I hope that you learned something from listening to this. So thank you very much.
Per. Thank you so much. Maybe you would like to stop sharing the screen if you wish, or you can leave it as you like. And I would suggest now is instead of using the chat to make it more interactive, you just use your raise hand function and use the microphone. We can make more interactive. So who would like to start this interesting discussion? We have Maria Jose and Lisa. Maria Jose, please. And Jacqueline. We cannot hear you.
Now?
Yes, we can hear you well. Yes, perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for organizing this interesting presentation, and thank you for so much interesting information, because I work in my research is framed on ecosystems from the service domain logic approach. So it's quite close to this research. And I always have the challenge when working with papers of identifying new practices on, for example, crowdfunding context, and bring it to the theory. So I used to use the institutional approach that I suppose you are familiar with it from service domain logic. And how do you connect this? Because now I'm working on innovation ecosystems. So there are contexts in which new practices arise because there are many actors interacting and new ideas and challenges appear. And I see quite close your bundle value co-creation practices is quite close to this ecosystem in which these rules are changing, and we can identify these practices and how to measure, because sometimes actors are not conscious, they don't know how they are innovating. So it's the researchers that identified. My option sometimes is to use experts and ask them about this context more than the actors that they don't know sometimes so much. Thank you.
Yeah, I in the paper that I showed you that is in press with Journal of Service Research with Johanna Gumerus, we have a section on institutional theory and how institutional theory approaches practices. So you basically, as I understand it at least, institutional theory says that there are institutions, almost according to this homo sociologicus perspective that I show you, that there are values, norms that make up structures and institutions that people then rely on to do things. So an institutional theory perspective would say that the practices are controlled by these institutions then. But what practice theory does, as I would argue then, is to explain that this is in a more simple way. People do not rely on these broad institutions and structures, but they rely on templates that are within the practices, that are within the acting. And so a practice theory perspective would get rid of this institutional framing then. And you may not see that as a big problem, but if you go back to the foundations of institutional theory with the work of Mayer and Rowan and DiMaggio and Powell in the 70s and 80s, they launched institutional theory to be able to describe how the world becomes more similar, but then there was a lot of research on institutional entrepreneurship and so on that you may be familiar with. Perhaps.
Yeah,
which has been used in innovation research, right?
Yeah, that's it. In fact,
yeah.
Sorry.
But
I am
that idea, if I just that idea is not really consistent with this general footing of institutional theory. So that is what we are critiquing in this paper. That it is, if you want to stick to the foundation of institutional theory, it becomes hard to explain how entrepreneurship and institutional change emerged.
Yeah, well, in fact, we criticize that part because we consider the institutionalization process is with the side of institutions that make practices change. Would you say it is consistent with your perspective? Because there is,
I think, if you want to a more simple way to answer your question, if you want to study practices, I think practice theory gives you a theoretical repertoire for doing that. Institutional theory is more focusing on the institutions, and is saying that it's in institutions that control the practices, but it doesn't give you a language and a framework for studying practices, as I see it at least. Then it's better to turn to practice theory if you want to be able to identify practices and to understand practices. And I think several of the papers that I mentioned there, the early work by Skaum, Muniz, and Arnold in Journal Marketing from 2009 on value creation practices in brand communities. That is also a very good starting point to understand how practice theory can be used to identify practices, because in that paper they identify, is it 12 or 16 practices in 4 aggregates or something like that. So they use it to understand how the anatomy of brand communities, you can say. So maybe that is also a good paper to look into if you want to understand how you can use practice theory to identify and disentangle practices.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Lisa, please.
Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm a second year PhD student. Well, actually, no, third year now. Really enjoyed your lecture. It was really interesting for me because my project has a lot to do with internal marketing and how internal marketing affects customer experience, which seems like at the core, it's a very similar idea to what you were describing today. And since you mentioned that you did a lot of reading on the value research, the existing value research, and something that I've been struggling a little bit during my research. And since I'm mentioning a lot about co-creation of value between the company and the customers, where would you draw that line between collaboration and value co-creation? Is there a difference? Is there even a good reason to separate those, or is it a similar concept?
I think they are quite close, I would say. I showed you one paper from 2015 it's published in the European Journal Marketing with Bernard Kova and Stefano Pace. There we talk about collaborative practices, but to understand how value is created in this community that we are focusing on. It was a study of Alfa Romeo and the community that Alfa Romeo tried to build on. But we use the concept of collaborative practices almost in the same way as you could have stated it with the concept of co-creation practices. So I think they are quite close, even though I think, co-creation and co-creation practices has been used more in the research. So that's more common term that is used. And if you want to get a quick overview of that research in this paper that is online now with Johanna Gumerus on services and service innovation that I showed you. Also, it's online with it's going to be published by Journal of Service Research. There we have, one page that reviews research on value co-creation practices within service research. So that gives you a quick overview of how that concept has been used.
Yeah, that's great. That confirms some of the thoughts that I had on it. And another something that caught my eye earlier in your presentation, I think it was the MAP paper. You mentioned something about marketing practices or practices that go beyond the organization in one of the slides, in one of the parts of the paper, and I just wanted to quickly expand on that, and because I think that might be something that I could be very interested in, like going more in depth with.
Yeah, we wrote the first version of the paper focusing solely on the firm, so maybe it was even more close to your focus in that version. But then we got critiqued for not taking the environment into account, and how practices that are marketing practices that are developed within firms and used within firm extends to other types of actors, and how they can collaborate on the basis or co-create value on the basis of such practices. So that was maybe what I was meaning, how these internal practices also are extended to the environment of the firms, and how they can provide a basis for value co-creation and collaboration.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm starting to think that maybe practice theory could be useful in customer experience as well, because what you're saying is very similar to it's very applicable to the concept of touch points that I've been studying, because that is something that the firm is laying the foundation of for the customers to then interact with and feed that back into the company. So I think yes, thank you very much for inspiring that type of thinking. I will look into the theory and see if maybe I can use it for customer experience as well.
Yeah, you could quickly browse this marketing theory paper, because what it's intended to do is to provide, a language, a framework for understanding marketing activity. And I mean, it can be beneficial to you, but it can also be something else that you should focus on, but it can be an option.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jacqueline, your hand was raised before.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. So first of all, Professor, you've made me reflect on how I wasted lockdown. You did a reading project on value, whereas I baked sourdough bread and suffered from existential angst. So I'm just taking that away with me.
But I can just add there that, the lockdown in Sweden was not as the lockdown in the UK. So I could go out and breathe air and even go to work. so maybe I had an easier time than you had.
It sounds like I've got less excuse given that I was locked in my house.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask, from your theoretical framework where you have bundles of value co-creating practices, what is the new insight that you expect the application of this framework to bring to us?
Yeah, I think you can understand better what is going on when you conduct marketing in firms than by applying this perspective. You can understand better what is going on when you consume services, or when you produce services, or when you are engaged in services on the market, by these conceptualizations that we are offering, by the language that we are offering on the basis of practice theory. I think it's a perspective, particularly thinking about the service paper, which I'm working quite much with now. I think it's it's a perspective that resonates better with what actually is going on than you know, a logic perspective. So that would be my general argument. Then I think also that I will have a seminar for my colleagues here at the Service Research Center in a few weeks, and because I have been on sabbatical now, so I haven't been that much at work and interacting with them. So I will present particularly the SAP paper then, and suggest to them that we could use this framework to better understand servitization, service innovation, sustainability and services, and so on and so forth. All the research areas that we have at the Service Research Center. So that would be my short answer, perhaps.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other question or comment?
I have a question.
Yes, sure. Yes, please, Ashwin.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Per. So my question was this, that you mentioned that it was institutional theory that was kind of used, and then you saw some pitfalls in that, and that made you use this practice theory. So when you, went about this, did you kind of mention the pitfalls in institutional theory and then brought in practice theory, or how did you introduce that? What was the way you brought it? Because
Actually, when we wrote this service innovation paper, me and Johanna, that is coming out now with Journal of Service Research, we had in some version a quite long critique of institutional theory.
Okay.
And how practice theory could be a better enabling theory for understanding service ecosystems, for instance. But that was dropped during the process. But I think the key here is that as I said before, that practice theory provide you a terminology for understanding practices. Institutional theory is more focused on institutions. So if you want to study practices, I think, you know, practice theory provides you a better terminology than institutional theory. Then I'm not saying that the institutional theory is wrong and that you shouldn't use that, but if you're interested in practices, I think practice theory is better. And you know, some service innovation research that we review has been using institutional theory to be able to understand how practices are changing. And in relation to that research, we are saying that, well, if they would use practice theory, we would learn more about how these practices are changing.
And one more related question was that recently I read one of the paper which is yet to come in, which will be published in Journal of Marketing, which said about the empirics first approach. Go with empirical than start with a theoretical kind of approach. So what are your thoughts on that? So it is a recent paper which has kind of created a buzz, which says that empirics first, but not this theory or something like that.
So okay, so it's kind of a grounded theory idea that you should start with empirics and yes. Then yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean that there are certainly arguments for that, but I think, you know, there is a method book that is also available in English, Alvesson and Sköldberg's reflexive methodology, I think it's called in English, and they warn against this pure grounded theory approach, because you might end up studying something that has already been studied. So it can be a good idea to have an overview of what has been done before and do something in relation to that. I don't know exactly what they are suggesting in this Journal of Marketing paper that you are referring to, because I haven't read it, but I can see that risk. On the other hand, it's good with such a paper in marketing, I think, that has been so dominated by quantitative methods. So I appreciate that from that perspective. But still, I can also see the risk with that strategy.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ashwin. Any question? Coco, please.
Hi, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. We can see this one.
Yeah, so I just have a one question because I'm quite using more kind of old guidance and the Bourdieu in my PhD. That was ages ago. So now, you know, I'm catching up. But you mentioned the NHS as a kind of, you know, service sector, but can you see some kind of, you know, when you say core value creations, but something like this kind of public institution or, you know, or I don't know, even universities, if it's more kind of public run, are there any differences when we look at these cases that maybe, you know, what kind of particular practice can be applied in a commercial institution or public institution?
Very good question, and it connects actually to a paper that I'm writing together with a colleague here at the Service Research Center now, Jakob Tischler. You may know that in public management research, something that is called public service logic has been developed by Stephen Osborne. Mm-hmm. Are you aware of that research?
No, I will check.
No. But it's basically, you know, an attempt to use service dominant logic and service logic in public management research. Mm-hmm. And that research has been quite much used, and he has got a lot of citations and stuff like that. When we read that research, we think it's problematic in a public management or a public sector context, because you can say that service dominant logic and service logic is based on a market type of rationality, right? Actually, I have writing quite much with Rohit Varman, who is based at Birmingham, and we had a paper in Journal of Service Research that came out earlier this year that analyzed, you know, the market rationality of service research, saying that we need to take other type of rationalities into account. But what we do in this paper that we are working on now, me and Jakob, is to say that we need to be able not only to take private value into account, but also public value. So value for the society, right? So we are drawing on works from Bennington, what is his name? I have his book here. Is it Mark Moore, not Michael Moore. Mark Moore, published on public value in 1995, right? Was one of the books I was reading during the pandemic. So we are trying to develop actually, you know, a framework for public services and how we can ground that in practice theory. So my simple answer to you would be yes, there is difference between services in yeah. Yeah, that's the one. And there has been elaborations of Moore's work recently that is interesting, that I'm actually reading up on now. So, but yeah, so it's definitely a difference between private sector services and public sector services, but I don't think that has been that well accounted for previously in prior research, and we are trying to do that now.
Okay, so it's worth doing the research around the public as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I actually had a paper out in a new journal the other day, which I think the journal is called, I'm a bit unsure, Nordic Journal of Innovation in Public Services, that is making a bit of this argument also. How can we understand public services? But I think, you know, this concept of public value is very important to take in if you want to understand the public nature of services.
Thank you. Darcy?
Hello, good morning. Thank you for your presentation, Professor Per Skalen. Your research is very interesting. I'm studying the co-destruction of value in digital transformation, specifically in the...
Sorry,
the sound went off.
Yes, it was my fault, sorry.
Okay.
You need to unmute Darcy, please. Yes, can you talk now? Can you speak now?
Okay.
Yes, now, okay.
Yeah, now we hear you.
Well, I'm studying the co-destruction value in digital transformation, specifically in the transition from non-digital service to digital service. I faced the challenge of the research in the strategy field, and the challenge is to me to understand how does the creation or destruction of value return to value proposition, so that organization can consider it in the planning.
Did I understand you right, that how value co-destruction in the interface with customers affects the value proposition, or is that your question? Or
Yes. The organization have an non-digital service, and after digital transformation, it's transformed a digital service, and after value co-destruction or value co-creation, the organization could be return the value for considering reforming your value proposition, and how it's could be done.
yeah. I don't know if I have an exact answer to that, but in this paper with Johanna that is coming now in Journal of Service Research, I talked about several times, we use a study of the music business in Sweden and the music industry in Sweden from you know, the analog stage in which people were buying CDs and LPs and stuff like that, via the pirate stage that was very strong in Sweden. I don't know how it was in the UK, or maybe you are in Spain or
Brazil.
Brazil, okay.
Brazil,
sorry.
Brazil.
We had a phase of a lot of pirating in Sweden, and then we had streaming them with Spotify. So there are three. We see three phases in that paper, and you know, we are trying to understand the shift between these phases by using the concept of value co-destruction and value co-creation. And so people, when these new practices start to emerge in the market, people start to value co-create them because they feel that Spotify, for instance, is superior to Pirate Bay. And at the same time, they are value co-destructing the old practice then. So we see a kind of dialectic there between value co-creation and value co-destruction in the marketing, or sorry, in the market, that informs the service innovation, the creation of these new value co-creation practices then. So it doesn't really connect to your value proposition part of your question with with the firm having a value proposition. It doesn't connect to that, but it gives you maybe some hints about how you can use, you know, the notions of value co-creation and value co-destruction and in relation to service innovation then. And also the context of digitalization is present there in that paper.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other question? I would like to make a question. Is about the, well, first of all, congratulations. I really like your presentation and very inspiring. And I was thinking about the concept of practitioner, because it's at the core of your model. Yeah. And in your paper, Marketing Theory, you define practitioners as individuals who enact marketing practices. And by enacting, so the fact that you are enacting these practices makes you become, say, a practitioner. So my question is about the concept of individuals, because at the end of the day, we are individuals. But if you look, for instance, how companies work in real life, we are totally aware they work in teams that are interacting with other teams, and also teams that incorporate artificial intelligence within the company. Different functions of the firm work together, but also externally. Let's say servitization. I'm thinking Rolls-Royce. They have a team of engineers with artificial intelligence working with a team of engineers from British Airways. So the concept of practitioners in terms of conceptualization, and also I'm thinking, if I am going to apply this theory to a field study, empirical, how can we incorporate this concept of teams, so people working in projects as practitioners as well, with special purposes, their own rules, etc.
Yeah, it connects a bit to this concept of communities of practices also, that the community is constituted by the practices they share and the possibilities that you have to engage in the practices that are key to doing the things that you want to do in this team. So I think, you know, it's really a tricky question to say that, to answer simply here, what is an actor, what is an individual on the basis of practice theory. I have been thinking a lot of that myself. I mean, the basic answer here will be that an actor, according to practice theory, is constituted by the practices that the actor can engage in. So that is definitional for what an actor is then. On the other hand, they are saying that we are all individuals that can do whatever we want. We can act outside of these practices, doing crazy things, for instance. So exactly what an actor and an individual is a little bit hard to explain, at least from my reading of practice here. But I think you can come a long way, by using this general idea that actors are constituted by the practices that they have the possibility to engage in them.
Okay, so
I think Requis is writing something in his 2002 paper, which is a good introduction to practice theory, that actors are the sum of the practices that they engage in, or something like that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, any final question or comment? No. Okay, so thank you so much. As I said, we will be editing this video presentation, and then we will share in YouTube.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you so much, Per, for being with us today, dedicating time to be with us, and also with all of you. And I will let you know soon when we have another activity within our service research and customer experience group. Okay, and hopefully we can meet you in person in London one day. So.
Yeah, or at a conference or something like that. It was a pleasure to present this research. It's something that I have very much in my head now. So it was good to be able to speak about it and present it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. So have a good day. Enjoy the rest of the day, and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.